And welcome everybody again for the first session that it's my pleasure to chair of this 26th National Directors Meeting, focusing on the important linkages between mine action and displacement. So following up on the special advisor's keynote speech, we are going to hear from our panel members on some perspectives, and then hopefully we can have a discussion and some reflections from the special advisors as well. First of all, let me just introduce the panel members. We have Ms. Josephine Dresner, who is the Director of Policy and Strategic Partnerships at the Mines Advisory Group, and Sam Chung, who is the Global Protection Cluster Coordinator at UNHCR. And we will be joined, hopefully very, very soon, by Dr. Sabah Al-Hussaini, the Director of Iraq Mine Action Authority, who will speak from that perspective. So if you allow me just to say a few words before I hand over to our panel members and to the ensuing discussion, just to note that, of course, as you know, UNDP and the other UN agencies working on this in this area are very committed to helping the countries. And as the special advisor said, do knock on the door of the resident coordinators and the related agencies to get some support. We are all working on towards achieving the SDGs, to be a peaceful, just and inclusive societies, and mine action is an absolutely crucial element to that. We view mine action as a catalytic activity that contributes to the broader goals of sustaining peace, security, and human rights, and the humanitarian response and development, of course, cannot go without effective and efficient mine action. Mine action is a contributing factor to our efforts on addressing the gaps in the humanitarian development divide in the short term. It also contributes to the early recovery efforts and an accelerator for SDG implementation in crisis and post-crisis settings on the long run as well. We all know that mine action is increasingly becoming recognized as an enabler for people on the move, and particularly for safe return for those who were forced to flee their homes and violence. And the goal of this panel is actually exactly to look at the catalytic role of mine action as an enabler of safe movement for displaced people. As conflicts around the world continue to rise, they displace millions of people. We all know the numbers. Over 110 million people have been forced to leave their homes because of conflicts, violence, and disaster, and more than 2/3 remain trapped in their own countries. We also heard from the special advisor and our other speakers in the first segment on the big picture. And we also focus on implementing the 2022 UN Secretary General's Action Agenda on Internal Displacement as we strive to scale up all of our work in mine action in response to the call for development actors to step up. So, ladies and gentlemen, there has been a lot of significant international attention on understanding the drivers of forced displacement, conflict, violence, natural disasters, and climate change. But less attention is perhaps given to the challenges of people being able to find a sustainable solution to their own displacement. This encourages us to apply the mine action displacement lens in the most recent conflicts and disasters. And just to give you a few examples before our panel gives their perspective on mine action, as specifically as an enabler of durable solutions for displaced people in different contexts. In Ukraine, at the end of 2022, there were an estimated 5.9 million IDPs, the second highest figure in the world. And according to the government, 25% of Ukraine, over 180,000 square kilometers, has been exposed to the war and potentially contaminated. Explosive remains potentially could be putting over 14 million Ukrainians at risk. So the government of Ukraine has identified demining as one of the top 5 priorities in early recovery, and to allow people to safely return to their homes, utilize land for agricultural purposes. And in parallel, we also supported online services that helps internally displaced people access critical public services, basic food, and to get financial support and safe place to stay. In Yemen, as another example, more than 4.5 million people were displaced as a result of conflict, and last year's truce led to 77% increase in the numbers of returnees. Yet returns have exposed IDPs to landmines and explosive remnants of war, which made mine action a precondition for safe return. The government expanded the mine action in 143 districts, and 5.9 million square meters have been surveyed and cleared with our support as well. These examples demonstrate that without the safe passages and mine action, displaced people will not be able to return safely to their homes, launch local area-based development interventions, initiatives, reconstruction of damaged infrastructure, and other interventions. Finally, let me just press the power of partnerships, and hopefully we can cover that as well during this conference, as we all know that no one actor, especially in this area, can provide a comprehensive, durable solution. Mine action community is an important contributor to the multi-partner efforts and an enabler to a coherence and a coherent response for displaced persons and affected communities. So with that introduction, I'd like to turn to our panel members. And Josephine, if I can ask you from the Mines Advisory Group to share your perspectives and your experience and the latest development also in your initiatives.
Thank you very much. And well, thanks again for inviting MAG to participate in this panel. Displacement is a major consideration in the planning of all of MAG's operations for reasons that we've already started to hear this morning, and also in terms of thinking about impacts. It applies to so many of the places that we work, from the protracted and complex displacement within South Sudan and across its borders, to the different waves of displacement during almost 30 years that MAG has worked in the Middle East, from the Gulf Wars to the ISIS conflict. In conflict-affected regions, the presence of landmines and explosive remnants of war not only poses immediate threats to the safety and lives of individuals, but also perpetuates the vulnerability of displaced communities. It's essential that we prioritize initiatives that not only ensure their safety and security, but also create opportunities for empowerment, enabling displaced people to actively participate in generating solutions and rebuilding their lives. It's important to acknowledge the different types of displacement, including IDPs, refugees, and returnees. While this panel does focus primarily on internal displacement, I feel that it's important to also include refugees, given that a growing number of people are displaced multiple times. So they may first be IDPs and then refugees, or vice versa. In each different stage of displacement and return, needs vary, and mine action delivery should reflect this, rather than, for example, identical risk education and materials being delivered to all at each stage. We should instead, and we do, provide tailored messaging and collect data as well, where possible, at each stage of the process. Returnees are the most vulnerable group in terms of mine and ERW incidents, and particular attention should be given to the role of mine action during planning for and during returns. For example, during spikes in returns from the Dadaab refugee camps, MAG has worked with other sector partners to ensure risk education is delivered at each waypoint within Somalia, alongside food, water, shelter, and health provision provided by other actors. I think it is essential to recognize the risks associated with forced returns in the context of mine contamination. This can compose significant dangers where there is extensive mine and explosive remnants of war contamination, and without the prerequisite clearance, risk assessment procedures and risk assessment procedures in place, forced returns can expose individuals and communities to life-threatening hazards that we have a responsibility to protect them from. Displaced persons must have access to accurate and up-to-date information about the potential mine contamination in their places of origin, and importantly, the agency to make informed decisions regarding their return. Conducting comprehensive and thorough mine clearance operations prior to any planned return efforts is crucial to ensure the safety and well-being of those returning, and it is imperative that durable solutions prioritize the protection and the security of displaced persons. A key challenge in densely contaminated countries when the conflict has moved on is that the push to return often comes from displaced people themselves, despite the fact that their homes are affected by explosive hazards. This has especially been the case in Iraq, Ukraine, and also for Syrian refugees in Lebanon. And the information has to be sensitively delivered to discourage people from putting themselves in danger, but also not dismissing what is a very human desire to return home. UXO and mine contamination, excuse me one second. UXO and mine contamination creates physical barriers and restricts the freedom of movement for displaced persons. The fear of encountering explosive hazards also limits their ability to access essential services such as water sources, food, healthcare facilities, schools, and livelihood opportunities. This situation exacerbates their vulnerability and prolongs their displacement as they are unable to navigate the areas safely. Ensuring the freedom of movement for displaced people is crucial for their well-being and the possibility of achieving durable solutions. It is also a fundamental aspect of upholding multiple human rights and ensuring implementation of the SDGs for the benefit of all. Displaced people often rely on agriculture, livestock, or other forms of livelihoods to sustain themselves and their families. However, the presence of contamination renders the land unusable, preventing them from engaging in productive activities. Clearing fertile agricultural land is something that we very much prioritize in contexts like South Sudan, where displacement and the density of mine contamination does actually overlap with some of the most valuable and most fertile land, which also itself, when it can't be used, feeds into displacement due to food insecurity issues. The presence of UXO in or around IDP camps or makeshift settlements heightens the vulnerability of displaced populations, particularly children. The curiosity or lack of awareness about the dangers of explosive remnants of war can lead to accidental explosions and severe injuries. Additionally, the absence of proper infrastructure and limited access to medical care further exacerbates the risks and challenges faced by IDPs in such environments. Where establishment of refugee or IDP camps are concerned, the role of the mine action sector is absolutely critical. In a memorable example, MAG worked with an agency in North Iraq who had established a refugee camp for Syrian refugees on a former firing range, posing a hazard to the personnel putting up the shelter and further hazards to the people within the camp. MAG worked with that partner to clear around the camp to the extent possible and also to provide risk education to the people within the camp. But this could have been completely avoided with better cooperation and communication by selecting another location that wasn't contaminated. In emergency contexts, including both conflict and natural disasters affected contaminated areas, which cause displacement within and across national borders, they face increased risks from unexploded ordnance. Carrying out clearance in such situations can be challenging due to political tensions, lack of security, or the time and resource constraints involved compared to the speed at which populations are moving. Rolling out risk education programs at the earliest stages of crises helps reduce the risks faced by displaced communities as they navigate potentially contaminated areas. And I think as we start to see the increased interaction between mine and ERW contamination and extreme weather, flooding, forest fires, this is something really to bear in mind, that different sectors, I think particularly disaster risk reduction and mine action, need to be more closely linked. Empowerment, which is the other kind of key point that I wanted to come to in this presentation, involves equipping individuals with the knowledge, skills, resources, and opportunities to make informed decisions, exercise agency, and improve their socio-economic well-being. The goal of empowerment is to foster independence, self-reliance, and active participation in shaping one's own future. Displaced people often face a loss of control, dignity, and agency due to their displacement. Engagement in mine action activities presents empowerment opportunities. It can enable individuals to regain a sense of control over their lives, make choices, and actively contribute to the decision-making processes that affect them. Durable solutions focus on enabling displaced persons to enjoy the full spectrum of human rights, making empowerment a key concept. Initiatives to hire displaced person in mine action activities serve as a powerful means of empowerment. By providing employment opportunities, individuals gain financial independence, skills development, and a sense of purpose, enabling people to rebuild their lives with dignity. MAG's recruitment of displaced people in programs such as Iraq, Nigeria, and Myanmar. We've successfully hired and trained displaced individuals as deminers and community liaison officers. This not only provides them with economic empowerment, but also instills a sense of pride and purpose as they play an active role in making their community safer. I think it's very, very important to emphasize here that this is not a one-directional relationship. Also, the involvement of displaced people in mine action operations informs our operations. It makes them stronger, it makes them better. Similarly, engaging displaced communities in other mine action activities fosters a sense of ownership, self-reliance, and community resilience. Through community focal points and volunteer programs, such as those that we implement in South Sudan, individuals become active participants in delivering risk education and contributing to the overall safety and well-being of their communities. Direct delivery of mine action is not the only way in which displaced people can actively participate. In Nigeria, MAG's remote contamination baseline assessment, or pre-survey, is designed in recognition of the fact that displaced people are the most reliable source of information on contamination in areas that cannot be affected due to conflict. This enables high-level mapping by gathering data from people who may have come from villages and towns affected by mines and other explosive ordnance or passed through contaminated areas. MAG liaises with other actors to access reception centres where IDPs are being registered. Key informants can include community leaders, former combatants and land users such as farmers, as well as survivors of explosive ordnance. They are all within the community of displaced people. The data generated can be used to inform planning of returns processes, and it is also important in acknowledging the value of the experiences and knowledge of IDPs. And a number of focus group participants have gone on later to become MAG community liaison staff. Having already noted a couple of examples with other actors at the point of IDP registration and at waypoints, I would also like to highlight the productive cooperation between the mine action sector and UNHCR. Welcomed the opportunity to have worked alongside other operators to contribute a mine action chapter to the Durable Solutions Guidance for the Middle East. Similarly, members of the Explosive Ordnance Risk Education Advisory Group, including MAG, have contributed to the IOM displacement tracking matrix to ensure integration of mine action alongside other sectors. This practice avoids mine action becoming siloed and also ensures efficient use of resources by ensuring that mine-related data can be generated without having to deploy dedicated mine action resources. And that leaves more to support, other areas of need for IDPs. I chose to conclude with those examples of partnership to highlight that, as ever, we are stronger than the sum of our parts. This strength is essential to address the complex challenges surrounding displacement and mine contamination. Let us continue working together to empower displaced people, pave the way for their prosperous futures, and build a world where every individual has the right to thrive. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Josephine, for this great summary and also for emphasizing the role of communities, and we have to put people and communities in the center of mine action, and for the examples that you shared. So let me turn to you, Sam. You're the global coordinator of the protection cluster. So if you can talk a little bit about the role of mine action within the protection area and then your experience from UNHCR. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and distinguished guests, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. First, let me say it is indeed an honor for me to be invited to this panel at the International Meeting of Mine Action Directors. We have proudly written on our Global Protection Cluster website a quote that is, "In times of crisis, humanity demands that we act to protect all those ravaged by situations of conflict, violence, disaster, and other emergencies. And to me, that resonates so clearly with the title here, Mine Action Cannot Wait. I think really those two come together as a strategic interest together. And once again, my pleasure to be here today. On behalf of UNHCR, I coordinate the Global Protection Cluster, which is a network of UN, international, and national organizations committed to advancing protection in humanitarian emergencies around the world. And as part of that cluster, we are very grateful and proud to have UNMAS leading the mine action area of responsibility, because we see these multi-stakeholder, these multi-partner efforts, particularly on mine action, as being critical to the protection of conflict-affected and displaced communities in humanitarian emergencies around the world. The evidence is clear that the unlawful use of mines and other explosive ordnance is a deadly injustice, which continues to be of immense concern in humanitarian emergencies around the world. In 2022, over 90% of our protection clusters were active in conflict settings around the world, where the needs to uphold international humanitarian law and prioritize the protection of civilians was ever pressing. The presence of mines and explosive ordnance are reported as a high risk in 85% of our cluster operations, with 54% of those clusters reporting the risks as severe or extremely severe. In 2022, the number of people endangered by explosive ordnance contamination increased from 50 million to more than 60 million. And according to our preliminary analysis, as of May 2023, as many as 72 million were in need of mine action in 18 countries around the world. This constitutes an increase of clearly more than 20 million since June of last year, explained by changing conflict dynamics around the world. Not only are too many lives being lost due to explosive ordnance, but we also know that many of the injuries suffered by survivors result in long-term disabilities, impacting people over the course of their lives and compounding other protection risks and vulnerabilities. As part of our work, we constantly review the protection landscape in humanitarian emergencies around the world, and we try to understand what are the main protection drivers behind the situations. And here we clearly see that mine action, once again, is not only a key challenge, but also progress in that sphere is a key game changer. In Ukraine, for example, where we've seen recently that more than 92% of civilian casualties were the result of explosive weapons, the majority in populated areas. We also see exposure to mines and national estimates around 1/3 of the land contaminating, making it unsafe for civilians to move. In situations like Syria, where 1 in 3 communities are estimated to be contaminated by explosive ordnance, or all 15 states in Myanmar believed to be contaminated as well, causing 30% of the conflict-related deaths and injuries. And of course, we know the situation in Sudan today, where explosive ordnance contamination is today and will continue to be of utmost concern. In all of those situations around the world, we see mine action as a game changer in terms of advancing the protection agenda. Maybe in following that, to say mine action is not only key to the protection agenda, but it's key, as Robert indicated in his keynote address, to protecting displaced persons, internally displaced persons around the world. We've seen the figures this year from UNHCR's Global Trends, more than 110 million forcibly displaced around the world and more than 70 million internally displaced, more than 62 million of those in conflict situations around the world. Robert also spoke of the high correlation between those in internal displacement and those countries suffering from the contamination of mines and explosive ordnance. So we know, it's clear, mine action is critical across the displacement spectrum. It starts when conflicts do occur, and our mandate, our impetus, our imperative to minimize the risks of harm to civilians of all ages, genders, and diversities during conflict, including that preliminary, that beginning ability to flee to safety. But it also continues and cuts across all spheres of humanitarian action to peace building and to durable solutions as well. And on this, may I say that we see clearly that the issue is larger than just returns of internally displaced persons to their places of origin, but it really is about all the solutions that internal displaced persons may choose to find, including sustainable reintegration in their place of origin, sustainable local integration in areas where they may take refuge, or sustainable integration in another part of the country. All of these are predicated clearly on long-term safety and security, including from the contamination of mines and explosive ordnance. The work that we have in mine action, including victim assistance, including risk awareness, all of that sets the stage and the prospects for peace, not only at the level of nations, but also at the level of individuals and communities, setting a stage for them to reintegrate and to find livelihoods and safe futures. We say that clearly in situations, in fragile situations such as in Ethiopia today, where mine action is not only an impediment for returns, but also an enabler for livelihoods, education, and for further peace. I had the fortune earlier this year of going to Somalia together with the mine action area of responsibility. And I had the good fortune to be in a camp for internally displaced persons where we together delivered a mine risk awareness session with the communities there. And what I heard loud and clear from the community there was they looked at mine action and safety from mines and explosive ordnance, not just as a distinct issue in and of itself, but really as part and parcel with the prospects for peace and for their futures themselves. Lastly, let me perhaps come to the issue of mine action actors and the importance that they play in multi-stakeholder efforts around the world. We see clearly, I think the evidence is there, the analysis there, that mine action threatens the safety, rights, and well-beings of people, both in the immediate as well as in the longer term. It is of critical importance both in humanitarian emergencies, in protracted situations, and the achievement of longer-term solutions. And then that, may I just reiterate that the role of all the partners working as part of the mine action area of responsibility within the cluster are key to the protection and durable solutions agenda. We see this time and time again. We value and we need and rely on the expertise and the leadership of mine action actors in our collective efforts aimed at achieving durable solutions. Mine action coordination mechanisms are in place in 16 countries around the world, and they play a truly critical role in ensuring coherence, coverage, and quality in relation to mine action across protection clusters. All of these activities, which include humanitarian demining, risk education, and victim assistance, contribute to long-term safety and security. By integrating these elements into project design and implementation, organizations can set the stage and contribute to people finding and achieving long-lasting, durable solutions, especially for conflict-affected and contamination-affected populations, so that they can achieve a life of safety, dignity, and well-being. To protect displaced persons from contamination and facilitate the reintegration of communities, we strongly encourage the strengthening of all these activities, both risk education sessions, which once again are important both for individuals, but also for communities to achieve durable solutions. On economic reintegration for landmine and explosive ordnance survivors, also in terms of not only achieving an adequate standard of living, but finding and achieving a long-lasting hope for peace. And particularly, let us not forget the important work that mine action organizations have in helping individuals with disabilities and secondary victims develop the skills necessary for income-generating activities, designing solutions for survivors, the survivors who can then benefit from their expertise and knowledge by gathering lessons learned and applying these in humanitarian emergencies, once again, in protracted situations and in situations of peace around the world. I do have to note, unfortunately, the mine action area of responsibility is one of the least resourced out there. So I do once again make the call for all those to support it. It comes not only from funding and support, but also partnerships on the ground, access and building strategies together at the national level. So I do continually make that call for further resourcing and collaboration for this important area of work within the protection cluster. From our side, I can just only say that we are committed collectively to ensure our commitments to durable solutions translate into meaningful change and protection for people living through crisis. We are absolutely committed to continuing our work with the Mine Action Area of Responsibility and the colleagues around the world, as well as national colleagues, to implement the very best in programming, coordination, and advocacy on this important front. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for pointing out also some of the actions regarding the protection of displaced persons and the last call for furthering partnerships and resources for the mine action element. Let me welcome now on the panel here His Excellency Nazar Hamidi, who is the Minister of Environment of Iraq, and then Dr. Sabah Hussaini, who is the Director of Iraq Mine Action Authority. Welcome, and we're very much looking forward to hearing from you. How do you see it from your perspective in Iraq? The floor is yours.
السيدات والسادة الحضور، السلام عليكم جميعا. أتقدم بالشكر والتقدير إلى كافة منسقي هذا الاجتماع على الجهود المتميزة والتنظيم العالي، ونغتنم هذه المناسبة لنؤكد التزام جمهورية العراق على تنفيذ كافة بنود الاتفاقيات الدولية لنزع السلاح وفقا لمعايير شؤون الألغام الوطنية والدولية للأغراض الإنسانية. سيداتي سادتي، إن خطر الذخائر والمواد المتفجرة لا زالت تفتك بشكل مستمر بأبناء شعبنا، ولا زالت آثارها الاجتماعية والبيئية والاقتصادية تعرقل الاستقرار والتنمية وتمنع العوائل النازحة من العودة إلى مناطق سكناهم. على الرغم من كل الجهود الكبيرة التي بذلت من قبل حكومة بلادي والمجتمع الدولي لتقليل وطأة التأثيرات، وبالإضافة لذلك تسعى السلطة التنفيذية جاهدة وبدعم من الشركاء الوطنيين والدوليين لتعميم النوع الاجتماعي في الأعمال المتعلقة بالألغام من خلال تدريب ونشر فرق متوازنة للجنسين ومنحهما حقوقا وفرصا متساوية. وكذلك تم تنفيذ الإجراءات التي تسهل للضحايا وذويهم عملية الوصول الجيد إلى الخدمات الطبية والعلاجية والتأهيلية والاقتصادية. وأنجزت السلطة التنفيذية المعيار الوطني لمساعدة الضحايا في العراق الاتحادي المرقم 13/10 وبدعم من المنظمة الدولية للإعاقة، وجاري العمل على تكييف أنشطة الأعمال المتعلقة بالألغام لتكون متوافقة مع أهداف التنمية المستدامة ورؤية العراق لعام 2030. ويصاحب هذا الجهد الكبير الاستمرار بحملات التوعية للمجتمعات القريبة من التلوث، سيما أماكن النازحين العائدين إلى ديارهم، من أجل حماية الأرواح من خطر التلوث بالألغام والذخائر وتفادي وقوع الحوادث. وتم العمل على إدراج مفاهيم شؤون الألغام ضمن المناهج الدراسية، وكذلك تنظيم ورشة عمل عن عالمية معاهدة حظر الذخائر العنقودية تزامنا مع الاجتماع 11 للمعاهدة، وبالتعاون مع وحدة دعم التنفيذ للمعاهدة. وجاري التحضيرات الآن لعقد ورشة عمل أخرى خلال هذا العام وبدعم من الاتحاد الأوروبي ووحدة دعم التنفيذ لاتفاقية حظر الألغام المضادة للأفراد في المسائل المتعلقة بمساعدة الضحايا. ومن جانب آخر تم تحديث 24 معياراً وطنياً، وتم توقيع مذكرات تفاهم مع منظمة الأمم المتحدة للطفولة يونيسيف والوكالة السلوفينية ITF ومع جمهورية كوريا وسيتم توقيع مذكرة تفاهم أخرى خلال هذا العام مع مركز جنيف الدولي لإزالة الألغام للأغراض الإنسانية من أجل التحول إلى نظام الأمن المذكور، ومع المملكة العربية السعودية. ونؤكد في الختام بأن جمهورية العراق حريصة على الالتزام الكامل ببنود الاتفاقيات الدولية لنزع السلاح، وتتقدم للمجتمع الدولي بالشكر والتقدير للاهتمام الكبير والدعم المقدم من أجل بناء عراق مزدهر وخالي من الألغام، وأتمنى التوفيق والنجاح لأعمال هذا الاجتماع. شكرا جزيلا.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And I would like to pass the floor now to Dr. Al-Husseini for further.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to express my high appreciation for your organization of this, Madam Manager. You are the greatest supporter for our country, so we express our gratitude for your supported always. I would like to share with you some the view on the mine action program in Iraq. Bismillah. As you know, we have a two authority in the Iraq share the responsibility for the controlling the mine action program in Iraq. In the north, in the Kurdistan, we have an ACMA organization. This is the authority of the mine action file in Iraq, and our directory, including the rest of Iraq. We actually divided our for three center, and the Armak in the north, and Armak in the middle of the Iraq, and the Armak in the south, which is the most contaminated area in Iraq due to the successive war action in that area. We, as His Excellency said, we have determined our objective in the mine action program to protect our civilian people and livelihood from the threat and landmine of the explosive remnant of war, and clear the contaminated area and make them safe for the resettlement and agriculture and the infrastructure development, and to facilitate the safe return of the internally displaced person and refugees, and to promote the international and regional stability through the elimination of the EO. Actually, the impact of these actions. So I try to be shortening because we have a limited time now. Our country is exposed to many war activity from 16 up to the 2003. Started with the movement of the resistance of Kurdish resistance in the north of Iraq during the early 16 and 17s, and the Iraqi and Iranian war for 8 years during the 80s, and the Gulf war during the first and second war in the 90s, and actually we face other threat, the terrorist threat after the 2003. And from Al-Qaeda, and then the war against the ISIS. So during this, as a result of this successive military work, we have a great area of contamination reached to the more than 7,500 kilometers all over the Iraq. Next, please. This show our achievement in the achievement in the directory of the mine action, and in short, I say the area of our action extended to the clearance in more than 1,500 kilometers, and the NTS more than nearly the 19,000 kilometers, and the TS maybe reach to the more than 800 kilometers. In the north also, we have another achievement through the ECMA, reach up to 1,000, more than 1,000 kilometers. But we are, although we are doing our best in this file, we need more support and assistance, especially in the building our capability in facing this file. Next, please. Yes. This is the summary of the current situation in Iraq, and actually you see the open area more than 2,400 kilometers, and we closed more than 5,500 kilometers, and we are working on more than 500 kilometers now. Next, please. Actually we get the support from the different countries and different organizations, national and international, and we have a good collaboration with the national government and during through the Minister of Defense, Minister of Health, Minister of Interior. And actually this is the national effort. We supported from the international organization, different international organizations, especially from the UNMAS and the NGOs and the private sector, and the donors. We have here to mention many countries supported our country. We have mentioned in proud the help of the US Department of Defense, the UK, the Germany, Japan, Norway, the Netherlands, the Swiss government, the Luxembourg, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. All these countries support the Iraq actually in his file, because he actually he's a broad file. Next, please. Yes. We in risk reduction, actually the humanitarian side is so important in these places. We are perform more than actually 6,000 campaign in the awareness, and we actually we reached to more than 4 million, nearly 4,009,000 people, and we're trying to help our people to return to their place, especially in the north of Iraq, because it's exposed to the many war action during the ISIS period. It's a bad period for Iraq, and our situation in the south maybe more easier, because we have a plan to cover all the area now, and we are planning to initiate an ambitious national program with support of our government, with funding now in our new funding for the 2023 funding, more than $20 million for our action. In addition, of course, to the UK loan, which also another $20 million. Next, please. Victim, yes. We are trying to reach out to our victim and help them as we can, and we are actually make the medical care, socio-economic support, psychological support, and social inclusion are available for them. Now our government also including them in the social network of the Iraqis, and they pay a monthly salary for them, and all the services that the health services, economic services, all is free for them. And now we are working to give them small loans to initiate their small project for living. With this humanitarian slide, I would like to thank you all to listening to our presentation here, and I will concentrate the commitment in this file, and we're trying our best to finish this file during the next year according to the international convention. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for sharing your integrated approach under the Iraq Mine Action Program. And before I open the floor, I'd like to go back to the special advisor for some reflection and comments, and then we can hear from our audience as well. The floor is yours, Robert.
Thank you, Aggie, Excellency Minister, and ladies and gentlemen, again, a very interesting conversation around the central role of mine action and displacement and solutions. For me, some key messages that I took away from these excellent presentations. One, of course, is that the clear message is that mine action is a prerequisite. We cannot envisage success in displacement solutions and so forth without action on this mine and unexploded ordnances. It's for safety, it's key to our protection, it's key to a peace process. Second, mine action is both an obstacle and an enabler. We know the obstacles. It's pretty clear how mines and other unexploded ordnances can prevent people from their livelihoods. But on a more positive note, we also heard about examples of where mine action can empower people, can provide communities with a sense of agency. Third, a lot about partnership, about those bringing coalitions together. And I think in the Iraq context, not just Iraqis, but international partnerships, regional government, federal government, and so forth. Fourth, about moving early on this issue, that it's never too late or never too early, I should say, to think about incorporating these issues of EO contamination in discussions around siting of camps, in terms of planning returns processes and so forth, and to start educating a population on the mine risk and giving them, in a way, the capacity to manage that risk to some extent themselves. Fifth, yes, keep coming back to this notion of returning agency to IDPs themselves. Displacement is a tremendously disempowering event in terms of losing your assets, losing in many cases your legal documentation, and finding yourself in another community, very much cut from your roots. Everything we do when we think about solutions and internal displacement is about restoring that agency, allowing people to have more, if not all, the control necessary over their lives again. And this, I think, this link with mine action keeps coming through this morning, and it's very, very important. I think finally on government leadership, and it's great to have Iraq with us today. We know in the room and looking across the room at the incredibly important role governments have to lead this. No one else can substitute, as I said in my own comments, for government leadership, for government ownership. Only government can make that call on where are the priorities. Only governments can ensure the resources are there. They can bring in the development actors, but the development actors listen to governments first on where the priorities are. So really the process begins with that very strong government leadership. We've heard an example from the podium. I know there are others in the room. And on the solution side for displacement, we've also learnt this lesson, and it is so central. And as we think about transitioning in many countries from a humanitarian to more of a government-led development approach, we need to really look carefully at making sure that from as early as possible, we are ensuring that government is able, not only willing, but also able to provide that leadership. If we substitute, we defer, we postpone the moment in which we can really address this problem at scale. We can do great things, each of us in our projects one by one, but we can't really move the needle on a national scale unless we work under very strong government leadership. So thank you for this. I will keep, I remain until for another 10 minutes or so, but I thank you for an opportunity to comment, and thank you again for having me here. Thanks, Aggie.
Thank you very much, Robert. So with that, I would like to turn to the audience and just open it up for your questions, reflections, comments, whether it's a question to the panel members or you would like to reflect on any of the points. So if you can turn your cards vertically or put your hand up. If you could please introduce yourself, where you are from, and then proceed.
Hi, Paul Heslop from UNDP, Ukraine. Following on with what Mr. Piper just said, I think in a mine action context, and this is particularly relevant in Ukraine, but I think in designing mine action programs in other parts of the world, it's relevant, is an approach to risk management with regard to displacement and how you manage that. In Ukraine, I think at the moment there is obviously massive displacement, and this is a significant problem for the country and for the world in a sense. And yeah, and it's very multidimensional and it affects different people in different ways. But what I would say is, in terms of those areas of risk, so if you're in the controlled territory, if you're close to the front line, if you're in the buffer, or if you're in the rest of the country, there is a different level of risk that is driving displacement. There is a different level of risk if you're in an urban or a rural context, and often in the rural context, it's not an actual risk, it's a perception of risk that is stopping land being used or stopping people returning or stopping land being used in a constructive way. In an urban context, there is going to be so many different challenges coming from the many different types of explosive weaponry that's being used in the context, and even going as far as deliberate booby traps to prevent people coming home or to stop essential services being put into place. Then in the context of Ukraine, there's time-driven risk. People want to be back, people want to be on the land, and so they're taking risks today that would perhaps not be acceptable in a year or 3 or 5 years' time. So we need to be take into account the context of time and what time means today, or what it will mean in a year's time. And so I think all of these different elements of risk, which in a sense becomes a 4-dimensional model, will affect the ability for people to return, or to create an environment that enables people to return. And I think what will often be forgotten is, in a context like Ukraine, everybody acknowledges the high-risk work that deminers and EOD operators are doing. But what about the people who are going to repair the essential services, reinstate the telephone network, rebuild the electricity network, repair the sewerage and water and sanitation network? Those men and women who are going back in don't have time to wait for every mine or bomb to be cleared. So how do we prepare them to be able to operate in a hostile environment that will then allow others to return safely? And so, I think in terms of, just the observation I wanted to make in this context is, if we don't have a proper mapping and management of risk, the problem is made worse rather than better.
Thank you very much. So you raised the issue of risk, and we can turn to the panel for some reflections on that. But let me just see if anybody else would like to come in first. We really would like to hear from you. So while we perhaps take another round with the panel, if anybody else would like to speak, please indicate. In no particular order, I think you raised the question of risk. So maybe turning back to the panel, if you have 1 or 2 key approaches, how you think these risks can be managed and anticipated and managed. I don't know who would like to start. Perhaps, Robert, would you like to reflect on that first, since you have to leave? Or
I think just one observation, which is really the example we heard, I think, from Josephine too, about how displaced people themselves can push the agenda faster than we are able to kind of keep up with them, in fact, and this urge to go home when it may not necessarily be safe. And so I think, just to make the point, I think that showing the respect to the IDPs themselves to actually make that call themselves, but then making sure that they have the information necessary to make an informed decision, I think is crucial. It's a difficult balance to find, but ultimately they need to make those decisions. That calculation is different for every person, and I'm very struck by the example of the workers re-establishing services as well, because I think you're absolutely right. This is a high risk work that's not necessarily recognized given the threat of UXOs and others. But yeah, I'll stop there. Not much to offer. Sorry.
Thank you. Maybe Sam, I think this is a good segue, because I'm sure from UNHCR's perspective and as head of the protection cluster, you are faced with this dilemma often. Do we support people going back to their homelands and under what condition as the risks need to be managed for their safe return?
Thank you. No, it is, I'd love to discuss further this four-pronged risk model we've spoken of. I'd perhaps say what would be interesting is to consider to turn that from and building on Robert's statement, to turn that from a risk management model to an agency management model. And I'm not talking about organizations, but we're talking about the agency of people and communities themselves. I think your reflections in terms of how time and the urgency of movement and reclaiming homes and reclaiming livelihoods drives people. Also, likewise, in terms of other risks that are at play, those are clearly factors of agency that affect people's choices together. So I'd love to discuss that further in terms of an agency management model. But it's also very clear that there are different situations in different contexts, including in urban context and rural, as you mentioned, perceptions and people's information and what's driving that. So all that driving us to say one thing that we've always been trying to encourage in humanitarian as well as in solution settings is area-based approaches, more contextualized and more action plans based on what community preferences and designs are. We may make assumptions also in terms of community preferences regarding livelihoods, choices, movements, and all that then again affects how we prioritize and how we model our decontamination or our victim assistance or our risk education or advocacy activities in mine action. All those will be quite contextual, quite local based, and quite a bit, I think, linked to the preferences and choices of people on the ground, because ultimately that's who we're trying to serve, not the land, but the people around that. So those would be a bit my reflections, considering moving that risk to a agency management, and we can discuss that further, but also this emphasis on area-based and contextual approaches.
Thank you.
Well, I think a couple of the things that I was going to say have already been said. I think certainly the example of the the various emergency workers or reconstruction workers definitely resonated. That's something that we definitely noticed from our first assessment in Ukraine onwards, and certainly probably stating the obvious, but a very sensible risk management approach. And I think it is a neglected group of people for this, is definitely making sure that there is risk education for those workers, because they are likely to be going into places before they are completely clear, and therefore they need to be able to identify items and behave safely. I think the other thing that is just worth reflecting on is that a lot of the time, in a lot of contexts with displacement, it's not the case that everybody leaves. There are usually some people who are remaining behind for a variety of reasons. And then when returns happen, there are, again, for a variety of reasons, often tensions between those who left and came back and the ones who remained. And so I think needing to get more of a kind of local on the ground perspective in terms of what the risk is a good way of kind of involving the people who have remained behind and kind of ensuring the safety of their fellow community members who might be coming back. We have a lot of different communication tools available to us now to be able to reach people remotely without having to physically send non-technical survey teams out there. So I think there is something to be thought about there, but certainly in terms of a kind of rebuilding communities, I think involving those who have remained behind is quite an interesting perspective.
Thank you very much. Dr. Hussaini, if you'd like to add some perspectives from your experience on the ground, how do you deal with these risks?
Can I add this comments by my own language, please? الحقيقة أن في العراق عانينا تجارب مختلفة. تجربتنا تختلف عن كل دول العالم. الذي حدث في العراق أنه تعرض إلى مختلف الأخطار. لكم أن تتصوروا زملائي الأعزاء أنه في منطقة نينوى فرقنا الآن مع المنظمات الدولية تواجه أخطار حتى الأجساد المفخخة والبيوت المفخخة والطرق المفخخة التي تركتها عصابات داعش الإرهابية. لكم أن تتصوروا أن الجهد الذي نبذله في توعية الضحايا جهد سيكون مضاعف لعشرات المرات لضعف المستوى التعليمي لبعض المناطق التي تعرضت لهذا التهديد. مناطق فقيرة زراعية مستواها التعليمي منخفض، لذلك يكون على العاملين في مجال الإلغام من أجل توعيتهم بمخاطر الإلغام ومن أجل حمايتهم أن تبذل جهود مضاعفة في سبيل إيصال فكرة حمايتهم وإعادتهم سالمين إلى ديارهم. ذلك وضعنا في العراق وضع مختلف، ونستخدم معها تكنيكات مختلفة أيضا للمعالجة، ونستخدم أيضا تقنيات بمساعدة الأصدقاء مختلفة. الآن في الموصل القديمة، المدينة التاريخية للموصل الآن تعمل بعض المنظمات الدولية مثل التتراتك وهايلا تراست حتى لتفكيك الأجساد المفخخة للإرهابيين الذين تركوا في ساحة المعركة، وهو جهد كبير وعظيم لإعادة السكان النازحين إلى ديارهم. نجحنا أيضا في هذا الملف في غرب العراق بإعادة العديد من السكان من المخيمات إلى ديارهم. استصلحنا أراضي شاسعة في العراق، خصوصا في البادية الغربية في محافظة المثنى، كانت محرمة على العراق. هذا العام أنتجت الكثير من الحنطة، من منتوج الحنطة والقمح والفواكه والخضار وهذا ما نسعى إليه لإعادة الحياة للأرض، ونسعى أيضا لإعادة الحياة للإنسان، ونحفظ كرامة أبناء شعبنا. لكن الملف بالمجمل أعتقد أن لكل دولة وضعها الخاص وطرق تعاملها الخاصة مع هذا الملف، والتعاون وتبادل الخبرات بين الدول مطلوب جدا لتبادل الخبرة ولمشاركة قصص النجاح بين هذه الدول. أعتقد لدينا الكثير من قصص النجاح سواء في الأجزاء الغربية أو الأجزاء الشمالية والأجزاء الجنوبية من العراق، يمكن أن نشاركها مع زملائنا في العاملين في مختلف. نشارك أيضا زملائنا في أوكرانيا ونتعاطف معهم، لأن الوضع أيضا ليس بالسهل في أوكرانيا، وخصوصا مع استمرار الحرب، مع استمرار هذه الحرب الضروس. هناك خطورة أيضا للعامل في هذا المجال، كيف سيتعامل في ظل وجود الحرب. ندعو أن تكون هذه نهاية الحرب قريبة ولكل العالم بالسلام. نعمل الآن مع أخوتنا في إيران، وهذه تجربة أيضا لازم تعمم بالنجاح. البلدين الشقيقين الذين خاضوا غمار حرب 8 سنوات، نعمل الآن سوية لتخليص شعبنا من هذه الأخطار، ونعيد حدودنا نظيفة، نعيد فيها الزراعة ونزرع مكان. شعارنا كان، لعلكم لاحظتوا أن آخر سلايد في البرزنتيشن كان هو عبارة عن عبوة في داخلها زهرة. نحاول أن نضع مكان كل تهديد، نضع مكان الزهرة لنعيد الحياة لهذه الأرض.
Thank you very much for the very specific examples, and especially linking it to the livelihoods and the ability to go back to life-sustaining activities. Let me check with the room if anybody else would have any other questions or comments. I see 2 there, so if the gentleman, IOCTR, if you can. He's also a gentleman, so well.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. First of all, I want to thank all the organizers and all people who are in this hall who come to this important meeting. I just want to suggest, if I can suggest.
Ask you to introduce yourself, please, if you don't mind.
I didn't. My name is Sufyan Al-Sous from IOCTR. I just want to thank also Josephine for her idea about the refugees, and I just want to ask if there's any possibility to design a program for the refugees which they are in their country or outside their country, to rehabilitation these people and give them all information how to avoid the problems, how to avoid the mines, how to take care about it, and how to learn their children, how to learn their team, how to learn their, let's say, their villages before they go, and they, instead of they are sitting in only in camps and doing nothing. If it is possible, just somebody to design this program. It's in general now, I say, but I know it has so many details to be added for this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Then now over to you.
Hello, everyone. It is Ali from Iran, but I'm not working for Iran Mine Action Center. I'm working for oil company in private sectors and 24 years experience in mine action industry. So I have a question, especially from my brother in Iraqis, and ahlan wa sahlan. First of all, the mine action or activity or clearing the old areas, it's very, a valuable activity, and we have to hats off for these efforts. But my question that has been turned to the new challenge for me, how can we convince people who escape from the polluted area after the clearing area to force them or not force them, to make them happy and to take them back to the homeland? For example, in some countries such as Iran, Iraq, that had a war in the old days, not like Ukraine, that they are in the war right now. So they escaped from the homeland during the war. Now it passed about more than 30 years. So how can we convince the people to make them happy to come back to the homeland? I mean, I'm talking about the psychological affairs. So how can I convince them and prove them here is clear area and you can come back to the your place again?
Thank you. Anybody else? Then let me go back to our panel for final reflections on these couple of questions. Perhaps this time we start with you.
شكرا زميلي العزيز. السؤال مهم. كيف نقنع المهاجرين العودة، النازحين الداخليين في داخل العراق الحقيقة عادة ما يملكون مصالح خاصة في عودتهم إلى بلادهم. أغلب قرانا المهجرة هي قرى زراعية، أرضهم عزيزة عليهم، فلا بد أنه أكبر هدية نقدمها لهم أنه إحنا نزيل هذه الأخطار عنهم ونرجع لهم الأرض. بيوتهم عزيزة عليهم، أكثر ما يمكن أن نقدم للإنسان أن نعيد إلى بيته معزز مكرم. في النازح الخارجي هذا يختلف. من ينزح خارج العراق الحقيقة التعامل معه مختلف. منهم من أسس حياة في خارج العراق من الكفاءات، من الأطباء، من المهندسين، من رجال الأعمال، وهذا أسس حياته هو أصلا ما إلى الرغبة في أن يؤسس حياة جديدة في العراق مثلا. هذا هو أخذ خياره أخذ القرار مالته أن يبقى يأسس حياة أخرى في خارج العراق. من يحاول العودة أو من يطلب من الحكومة العودة، عادة ما تهيئ له الحكومة أسباب العودة وتوفر له التعويض المادي للأضرار التي لحقت سواء بأرضه أو بسكنه، وتحاول أن تقدم له المساعدة الممكنة في عودته إلى الأرض. ولدينا أيضا آلاف الأسر التي عادت الآن إلى مساكنها وعوضت بملايين الدولارات الحقيقة هذه الأسر لإعادة بناء حياتها، ودعمهم دائما مستمر. النازح الداخلي الحقيقة لا يشكل تأثير كبير في قضية الإقناع، لكن النازح الخارجي هو الذي نواجه معه صعوبة في إقناعه إلى العودة إلى الديار، لأنه ربما أسس حياة يعتقد أنها أفضل خارج بلده، وله الحق في العودة في أي وقت سواء لبلده أو يبقى في هذا حرية قرار. شكرا.
Thank you very much for that very from the field experience of really reading the situation. So final words and comments on this, or any other final comments you would like to make with Josephine and then Sam.
Thanks. So in response to the question from IOCTR, I think the short answer is yes. You know, such programs do exist in a variety of countries. But, you know, having something generic, the kind of program that can be applied to any context is quite difficult, so that they are normally designed, you know, within the context and ideally with participation from, you know, from the affected communities, including the IDPs and refugees. So, you know, happy to talk more if you're thinking about specific regions or countries that you wanted to look at. But in short, yes, but with provisions.
And maybe just to build on that, I mean, certainly I think risk awareness is part of any type of refugee return support. On that, from what I notice, it requires ongoing creativity, may I say, collaboration and context. So there is certainly risk awareness education that's done, particularly these days with Zoom, that has made things easier in terms of reaching people, both even whose prospects for return are either remote or immediate. But then, of course, the more immediate is upon return and closer to the local context. And all of that requires some creativity, as I say, in terms of ways to communicate, ways to identify, but also collaboration with, it's not just, again, a general one size fits all, but and then really the context on the ground, which makes it most effective.
Thank you very much. If there are no other questions, I really want to thank the panelists and reflect on the fact that I think, you know, these examples that you shared and the questions. Oh, I'm sorry. We will have one last question from Mauritania and then we can close.
Excusez-moi. Bonjour. C'est plutôt, ça sera plutôt une suggestion qu'une question. Je voudrais demander à l'ensemble, à débuter par l'HCR, nous savons tous aujourd'hui qu'il y a un corridor pratiquement prédéfini entre le sud et le nord dans le cadre de l'immigration, qui passe par, bien évidemment, le sud du continent africain et qui va dans la direction du nord. Et je voudrais demander à l'ensemble, bien évidemment, à la prestigieuse institution HCR, de prêter attention à ce corridor parce qu'il est parsemé de champs de mines et c'est effectivement le couloir le plus prisé par les migrants. Ce qui fait qu'il y a un danger supplémentaire qui doit attirer notre attention. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much. Sam, would you like to respond to the mine action around the migrant routes from south to north?
I mean, we take your recommendation clearly that the movement of peoples throughout migration channels is certainly affected by mine contamination just as much as conflict affected populations as well. And certainly, I think that is part of our efforts on it. It does require more visibility. I do believe many of these contexts that we've worked on, and I've worked in several of them myself, including, for example, Libya, where in the midst of conflict, you have the migration routes as well, and all equally affected by the effects of conflict on there are addressed as what we would call conflict affected populations. The ones you speak of are often ones that are invisible within that and require greater visibility. So I would certainly encourage and support your recommendation.
Sure.
And I think just to add to that, of course, we've just had for the last 3 days the intersessional meeting of the Mine Ban Treaty, which of course, so you were right here down the front. And I think it's also important to recognise that, you know, displacement and movement of people is one of the things that is in the preamble of the treaty. It's one of the things that frames the purpose of the treaty. So, you know, individual affected states, you know, continuing to work with support from the international community where necessary to clear those mined areas at the national level. You know, if people are upholding those obligations, and that naturally would contribute to clearing the corridors that you're describing.
Thank you very much. I think, you know, all of these questions and the examples really demonstrate that without the safe passage and the mine action, it's not only about the displaced people's ability to return to their homes, but affecting a number of other areas for their livelihoods, for global migration and so forth. So the importance of mine action underpinning both the humanitarian development and peace nexus areas is very clear from these discussions. And I know that in the afternoon, we will look at other areas from climate and hopefully we can also conclude with an integrated ideas on the way forward. So with that, if you allow me, I would like to close this session and thank our panelists. Thank you very much, and the Minister for joining us, and for all of you for your participation. Thank you.